She had characterized him as a distinct menace to the foundations of democracy, and he responded with the subtle grin of a gentleman who had dedicated 7 years of his life to the legal defense of those accused of killing before, transitioning to the prosecution of terrorists. Then he unfastened the leather briefcase. Contained within its confines were the details of 60 jury trials, $1 billion involving fraudulent activities, and 3 matrimonial unions that no observer could adequately explain. Room 2154 of the Rayburn House office building is not architecturally intended for ease or relaxation. Rather, it is designed for the specific purpose of confrontation. The dais is positioned at an elevation, a sweeping, curved bench constructed of dark timber, where the elected members of Congress physically look down upon the witness table situated below. The design is intentional and communicates a silent message, stating, "We are positioned above you, and your presence here is solely to provide answers." On this specific morning in January, the chamber was filled to a capacity that it had not experienced in many years. The gallery comprised of 300 seats, organized in lines behind the witness table, contained a demographic representation of America that would have been inconceivable a generation prior. On the left side sat families hailing from the Cedar Riverside neighborhood of Minneapolis, which stands as the largest Somali-American enclave within the United States. Many of use an enclave, Suntu 1912. The women were adorned in hijabs, and many of the men wore kufi caps, sitting upright, with the dignified anxiety of individuals who realized that the events transpiring in this room would influence how the remainder of the nation viewed them. On the opposite side sat a divergent gathering consisting of advocates, auditors, and a small group of parents who had motored from Minnesota to Washington because they had discovered through news broadcasts and judicial filings that federal funds intended to nourish their offspring had instead purchased waterfront real estate, luxury automobiles, and first-class aviation tickets to the Maldives. Situated between these two distinct factions, in the neutral territory of the center aisle, sat the blithe members of the press with cameras fixed upon tripods, boom, microphones suspended on elongated arms, and the red recording indicators of C-SPAN glowing like diminutive patient eyes. The witness made his appearance at 8:45, exactly 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Kash Patel, known to the world simply as Kash, walked into room 2154 inches, the same manner he had entered courtrooms for 2 decades, unaccompanied, carrying a single briefcase and dressed in a suit that was tailored correctly, but did not call attention to itself. There was no entourage surrounding him, no deputy director flanking his right side, and no communications staff whispering final talking points into his ear. Just a solitary man and a leather case, moving the same way he had entered. Courtrooms in Miami-Dade County, Florida, when he was 26 years old, and defending individuals whom the state intended to incarcerate for the remainder of their natural lives. He was 45 years old, now serving as the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the 9th individual to hold this title, and the first of South Asian heritage. His hair was dark and cut short. His jaw was smoothly shaven, and his eyes were of a shade of brown that seemed inviting, in casual dialogue, but transformed into something significantly less welcoming. Under the fluorescent illumination of rooms such as this one, when the interrogation commenced, he placed the briefcase upon the witness table. He poured himself a glass of water. He took to his seat and placed his hands flat against the table, a practice retained from his days as a public defender, when he had ascertained that juries place their faith in witnesses, whose hands remain visible and harbor suspicion toward witnesses who conceal them. The members of the committee filed in with the Republicans, arriving first, followed by the Democrats, and finally, the chairman, a Republican from Kentucky, who had established his career investigating the finances of others and who approached this duty with the vigor of a bloodhound that has detected a Dollaby scent. The vice chair, a Democrat from Maryland, took the seat to his left, organizing documents with the practiced neutrality of someone who was already aware that this morning would prove unpleasant. For her political party, the final member to occupy her seat was Representative Ilhan Omar. She entered through the side entrance designated for committee members, a minor privilege of institutional authority that positioned her arrival nearer to the dais and further from the gallery, as though the architecture itself sought to separate her from the populace she represented. She was dressed in a deep purple hijab and a dark blazer. Her gait was assured, the walk of a woman who had survived a refugee camp in Kenya, secured election to Congress as the first Somali American in history, been celebrated on the cover of Time magazine, been criticized by her own party, been removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee, been investigated by the Activista Day Talk About House Ethics Office, and had emerged from every crisis with crisis, her seat secure, and her voice undiminished. She took her position on the dais and glanced at Patel, a fleeting, evaluative gaze, the look of a politician determining whether the individual across the room represented an obstacle or an opportunity. Patel returned the gaze, his expression remaining unaltered, his hands staying flat upon the table. The chairman brought the hearing to order, stating that this morning the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform continues its inquiry into fraud and the past misuse of federal funds in the state of Minnesota. Our witness is the Honorable Kash Patel, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Director Patel, thank you for your presence. The chair recognizes Representative Omar for the initial round of inquiries. Omar leaned toward her microphone, and when she spoke, her voice possessed the specific clarity of someone who has spent her adult life ensuring she is heard first in refugee communities, then in the Minnesota State Legislature, and subsequently in the United States Congress. Director Patel, many members of the community I represent perceive that this investigation is politically motivated and that it targets the Somali American community, advance the president's agenda. Before we move forward, can you pledge to this committee that the FBI will execute this investigation fairly, without prejudice, and without the racial profiling that my constituents dread? It was a formidable opening, establishing the narrative she desired, not one of fraud, but of fairness, not of evidence, but of identity, declaring that this investigation is about race, and anyone who supports it is complicit. Patel took a sip of water. He placed the glass down, and when he done, spoke. His voice was measured not with the calculated tone of a politician selecting words, but with the measured precision of a trial lawyer, who has learned that the most impactful sentences are the briefest ones. Congresswoman, I commenced my career as a public defender in Miami-Dade County, Florida. I spent 7 years defending individuals the system wished to discard: murderers, drug traffickers, people who lacked the funds for a lawyer and were assigned one by the court. I defended their 20% constitutional rights, because in America, even the worst accused are entitled to a defense. He paused for a single beat, the pause of a lawyer allowing a sentence to resonate before delivering the subsequent one. So, when I state this, investigation will be fair. I understand the definition of that word I have experienced it from the opposite side of the courtroom. Another pause. Shorter this time, but fairness also implies that no individual is above the law, including members of Congress. The atmosphere in the room shifted not visibly. As no one moved, no one gasped, and no one murmured. But the air altered the way. Air changes prior to a storm, when the barometric pressure drops, and the birds cease singing. And everyone who has survived weather understands what is approaching. Omar's eyes narrowed a fraction, the fraction that distinguishes a politician who is in command from a politician who has just realized that the witness refuses to play the role she assigned him. Omar recovered rapidly. She was, whatever else might be said of her, a survivor, and survivors do not lose their composure. Over a solitary exchange, she had survived a civil war, a refugee camp, a hostile political landscape, and the sustained scrutiny of a president who had told her on national television to return to where she came. From a witness with a sharp tongue was not going to unsettle her. She leaned back into her microphone. Director Patel, let me ask you directly. The majority of defendants in the Feeding Our Future case are Somali Americans. The president has referred to Somali immigrants as garbage. He has suggested they contribute nothing. Do you believe this investigation is being conducted without racial bias? It was a trap, and a well-constructed one. If Patel answered yes, she would accuse him of ignoring racial profiling. If Patel answered no, she would utilize his words against the administration either way. The headline would focus on race rather than fraud. Patel did not select either option. He opened a third door. Congresswoman, I am the son of Indian immigrants from Uganda. My father, Pramod Patel, was born in East Africa to a family of Gujarati heritage. In 1972, the dictator Idi Amin ordered the expulsion of all people of Asian origin from Uganda, giving them 90 days. My father's family lost everything: their home, their business, their community. They were expelled because of the color of their skin. He allowed that statement to settle. My family arrived in America with nothing. They rebuilt from zero on Long Island, New York. My father became a financial officer. My mother raised children. They provided me every opportunity. This country offers education, freedom, the chance to become a public defender, a terrorism prosecutor, and now the director of the FBI. His voice did not elevate. It did not sharpen it. Simply proceeded with the steadiness of a man stating facts that require no embellishment. Please do not lecture me regarding the pain of immigration. Congresswoman, I have lived it. My family has lived it. And we arrived here legally, built our lives honestly, and never requested special treatment. He paused, and then, like a trial lawyer, shifting from an opening statement to direct examination, he altered his direction. But since you have raised the subject of the immigrant community, I would like to inquire about your own immigration record. Omar's jaw tightened. Stating that is not relevant to this hearing, Congresswoman. You asked me about the fairness of this investigation. I am answering. You asked for accountability. Let us commence with yours. He opened the briefcase. He removed a folder, thin, organized, and tabbed with colored markers, the folder of a lawyer who has prepared a case in 2002. You entered into a religious marriage. A Faith ceremony, not a legal one, with Ahmed Hirsi. You had 3 children together in 2009. While still in that relationship with Mr. Hirsi, you entered into a legal marriage filed with the state, with a man named Ahmed Noor. Syed Elmi. He turned a page. Mr. Elmi held British citizenship. After the marriage, he enrolled at North Dakota State University for your alma mater. He graduated in 2012. He then relocated to Minneapolis, where public records indicate he resided in a public housing complex before being evicted. He subsequently returned to the United Kingdom. He turned another page. In 2011, you and Mr. Elmi separated, but you did not legally divorce until 2017. 6 years later, during that 6-year period, in 2014 and 2015, you filed joint federal tax returns with Mr. Hirsi, the man you were living with while you were still legally married to Mr. Elmi. The Minnesota Campaign Finance Board confirmed this violation. You paid a $500 fine and filed amended returns. He closed the folder. He did not set it down. He held it. Congresswoman, I have a question. How many siblings? Do you have the question landed like a stone, dropped into still water? It was simple. It was direct. And Omar's response to it, or rather, her failure to respond to it, would inform the room of everything it needed to know, stating that is a conspiracy theory that has been debunked. Congresswoman, I did not ask about conspiracy theories. I asked how many siblings you have. It is a factual question. It has a factual answer, a number. I am the youngest of 7, and is Ahmed Noor, Said Elmi, one of those 7? He is not my brother. That is a baseless claim then. Provide the birth certificates, and we will know immediately. You have been asked this question for 10 years by journalists, by investigators, by the House Ethics Office for 10 years. You have refused to provide documentation. You have refused to make your family available to reporters. You have refused to release immigration records. He set the folder on the table. Congresswoman, in my years as a public defender, I represented hundreds of clients, and I learned something that every criminal defense lawyer learns. Innocent people desire to prove their innocence. They bring documents. They bring witnesses. They bring evidence only people with something to hide. Choose silence. Omar leaned forward. Her voice rose, not to a shout, but to the pitch of genuine indignation, which is a different thing from performed indignation, and which carries a different kind of energy, saying, "You are attacking me because I am a black Muslim woman, Congresswoman." Patel's voice did not rise to meet hers. It stayed exactly where it was, low, calm, and precise. My father was expelled from Uganda because of the color of his skin. He is Indian African. I am a Hindu serving as FBI director, a position that 100 years ago would never have been given to someone who looks like me. I celebrate Diwali in a building named after J. Edgar Hoover. He held her gaze. Do not play the victim card with me. It will not work. The gallery was silent, the kind of silence that descends when a weapon has been utilized. Not a loud weapon, not a dramatic weapon, but a precise one, the kind that leaves a clean wound. The chairman glanced at the clock. 26 minutes had elapsed in a normal Mulika. Oversight hearing. 26 minutes would have covered opening statements and perhaps the beginning of a first round of questions. Today, 26 minutes had been enough to surface immigration records, tax filings, marriage, timelines, and the silence of a congresswoman who had declined for a decade To answer a question that could be resolved with a single document, Omar had not spoken for 8 seconds. 8 seconds is not a long time in a congressional hearing. With cameras rolling and C-SPAN broadcasting to every screen in every congressional office and every newsroom and every living room where someone had tuned in, 8 seconds was a canyon. She filled it. She was too experienced to leave dead air. Director Patel, let me redirect this conversation to the actual subject of today's hearing. The FBI under your leadership has been described by career agents as politicized and weaponized. Multiple whistleblowers have come forward. Congresswoman Patel's voice carried the 2 words, like a door, closing gently, firmly, completely. Let me rephrase. You want to discuss accountability at the FBI. Wonderful. Let us discuss accountability. Let us start with $2,780,000. He removed a second folder from the briefcase. In 2020, you married Tim Minette. A political consultant, Mr. Minette, is the principal of a firm called the E Street Group. During your 2020 re-election campaign, the E Street Group received $2,780,000 in contracts from your campaign. The payments were listed as digital advertising, fundraising, consulting and mail production, and postage. He let the number breathe $2,780,000 from a congressional campaign to the campaign manager's firm, who happened to be the candidate's husband. An FEC complaint was filed. Your campaign terminated the contract with Mr. Minette's firm in November of 2020, after the election. After the money had been paid, your campaign stated that the termination was to ensure there was no perceived issue. Perceived, Congresswoman, not actual perceived. He turned a page before you married Mr. Minette. Were you aware that his previous wife stated in divorce filings that her marriage ended because of Mr. Minette's affair with you? Omar's staff seated behind her on the dais shifted in their chairs. The movement was small but visible. The involuntary movement of people who know where a line of questioning is headed and cannot stop it. Stating, my personal life is not, Congresswoman. $2,780,000 of campaign donor money went to your husband's firm. Your personal life became your donor's business. The moment you signed those checks, he turned another page. His voice shifted, not louder, but colder, the shift from a lawyer conducting examination to a lawyer presenting evidence. Let me show you something in 2023. Your Congressional Financial Disclosure Form listed total assets and income, consistent with a net worth of approximately $158,000. You also disclosed credit card and student loan debt of between $45,000 and $150,000. He paused 1 year later. 2024. Your financial disclosure listed your husband's stake in a venture capital firm called Rose Lake Capital at between $5 million and $25 million. His stake in a California winery called E Street Crew was listed at between $1 million and $5 million. He set both sheets side by side on the table from $158,000 to potentially $30 million in 12 months. He looked at the committee. House Oversight Chairman Comer said, and I am quoting, "It is not possible. I am a money guy. It is not possible." He looked at Omar. Congresswoman Rose Lake Capital's bank account contained 5 cents in 2023, 5 cents the following year. The company was valued at up to $25 million. Mr. Minette's other company, the winery, is currently the subject of a fraud lawsuit filed by an investor named Naim Maud, who alleges he was promised a $200 return on a $300,000 investment and received nothing. He closed the folder, and I would note, because the detail is relevant to the character question, not the legal one, that your husband operates a winery, a business that produces and sells alcohol. You are a devout Muslim. Islam prohibits the production, sale, and consumption of alcohol. I do not question anyone's faith that is between a person and God. But when you use your faith as a political shield, while your husband profits from a product that faith forbids, that is not hypocrisy, Congresswoman. He paused. His voice dropped to its lowest register that is a business model. A sound moved through the gallery, not laughter exactly, but the compressed exhale of people who have heard something they were thinking, but would not have said aloud. The chairman tapped his gavel once, not forcefully, but enough to restore order. Omar sat behind her nameplate. Her hands were still. Her face was composed, but her eyes. And this is the thing about eyes, the thing that cameras catch, and transcripts miss. Her eyes had the look of a woman who has just realized that the witness she expected to interrogate has become the prosecutor. There is a rhythm to cross-examination that only trial lawyers understand. It is not the rhythm of conversation, which is give and take, back and forth, a negotiation between two voices. It is the rhythm of control. The questioner sets the tempo. The questioner chooses the direction. The questioner decides when to advance and when to pause and when to strike. The witness is not a partner in the conversation. The witness is a subject of it. Kash Patel understood this rhythm the way a musician understands time signature, not intellectually, but physically in the body. In the way his voice rose and fell and paused, continued. He had learned it in Miami-Dade County, defending men accused of murder, where the wrong question at the wrong moment could mean the difference between freedom and life imprisonment. He had refined it at the Department of Justice prosecuting terrorists, where the right question at the right moment could unravel a network, and he was deploying it now in room 2154. Against a congresswoman who was accustomed to being the one asking the questions and who was discovering minute by minute that the rules of engagement had changed. Omar tried to retake the initiative. She leaned into her microphone with the posture of a woman who had decided to go on offense. The shoulders forward, chin slightly raised, voice pitched to carry authority. Director Patel, since you seem intent on making this hearing about me, rather than the investigation you are supposed to be conducting, let me address something directly. You authored the Nunes Memo, a document that many in the intelligence community described as misleading, and that was widely criticized as a partisan attack on the Russia investigation. You have a documented history of using your position to serve political agendas. So before you question my integrity, perhaps you should examine your own. It was the strongest thing she had said all morning. It was also tactically the wrong thing to say, because it opened a door that Patel had been waiting to walk through. Congresswoman, thank you for mentioning the Nunes Memo. Inspector General Michael Horowitz subsequently reviewed the FBI's FISA applications and found 17 significant errors and omissions. 17. The memo I helped write identified those abuses. The Inspector General confirmed them. I appreciate you bringing it up, he smiled, not a broad smile, a lawyer's smile, the smile that appears when opposing counsel has inadvertently introduced evidence that helps your case. But since you have raised the topic of public statements, I would like to discuss yours. He removed a third folder from the briefcase. This one was thinner than the others, but handled with more care. the way a lawyer handles the exhibit that will change the jury's understanding of the case. November 2012, you posted on social media, and I am reading from the archived record. Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. Hypnotized, the word you chose, was hypnotized. The trope of Jews controlling the world through dark powers is one of the oldest anti-Semitic canards in history. It predates the Holocaust. It was used in Nazi propaganda. And you, a member of the United States Congress, posted it on a public platform. He turned a page, February 2019 inches. Response to a question about political propaganda, support for Israel. You tweeted, and again, I am quoting the public. Record. It is all about the Benjamins, baby Benjamins. Slang for $100 bills. The implication that American support for Israel is purchased with Jewish money. The trope of Jews buying political lessons in influence is again one of the most recognized anti-Semitic canards in modern history. He turned another page. 3 weeks later, the 27th of February 2019, you stated publicly, I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it is okay for people to push for allegiance to a foreign country. Allegiance to a foreign country. The dual loyalty accusation. The claim that Jewish Americans are more loyal to Israel than to the United States. This trope has been used to justify persecution of Jews. For centuries, he set the pages down. 3 separate incidents. 3 separate anti-Semitic tropes. Your own party, the Democratic Party, introduced a resolution condemning your remarks. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Eliot Engel called your statements deeply offensive, and in February of 2023, the House of Representatives voted 218 to 211 to remove you from the Foreign Affairs Committee. He paused, and then his voice changed for the first 40 minutes of the hearing. Patel had spoken with the Dubban, controlled precision of a lawyer's sentences, measured emotions, contained every word. Placed with the deliberateness of a chess piece, moved across a board. Now, for the first time, something else entered his voice. Not anger exactly, something more, dangerous than anger. The quality of a man who has seen the thing he is about to describe, and who does not need rhetoric to make it resonate because the memory itself is sufficient. Congresswoman, I want to talk about September 11th. The room tightened. The 2 words September 11th carry a gravitational weight in American public life that no other date carries. They bend the air around them. They change the posture of everyone who hears them in the gallery. A woman in the 2nd row closed her eyes. A man in the 4th row placed his hand on the armrest and gripped it. 977 people died on September 11th, 2001. I grew up on Long Island, New York. I could see the smoke from the towers. Classmates of mine lost parents that day. Friends of my family never came home. His voice was low, not soft. Low. The voice of a man who is controlling something inside, himself, and succeeding. But only barely. I later became a terrorism prosecutor at the Department of Justice. I prosecuted individuals connected to terrorist organizations in East Africa and the United States. I coordinated with Special Operations Forces. I have looked into the eyes of people who wanted to kill Americans. I know what terrorism is, not from television, not from textbooks, from case files and courtrooms, and the faces of people who had lost someone. He looked directly at Omar. His eyes held hers and did not release them. In March of 2019, you gave a speech at a Council on American Islamic Relations event. You were discussing the founding of CAIR after September 11th, and you described the worst terrorist attack in American history, the murder of 977 human beings, with 5 words. He paused. Some people did something. The words landed in the room like a stone dropped into a cathedral, not because they were loud, because they were precise, because everyone in the room had heard them, before had debated them, had either defended them or condemned them. And now, in this room, in this context, spoken by a man who had prosecuted the kind of people who had done the something, the words sounded different. They sounded exactly as damning as they were. Some people, Congresswoman, as though 19 al-Qaeda hijackers, were some people, as though the coordinated murder of nearly 3,000 Americans was something as though the towers collapsing, and the Pentagon burning, and a field in Pennsylvania swallowing a plane full of passengers who fought. Back was an event that could be summarized with a shrug. His voice hardened. Not louder, harder. The hardness of iron, not of volume. I prosecuted terrorists. I built cases against people who recruited, financed, inspired attacks on American soil. That is not something that is war. And the people who did it are not some people. They are the enemy. He released her gaze. He took a breath. One breath. And when he spoke again, his voice had returned to the controlled, measured tone of the lawyer, as though the emotion of the previous 60 seconds had been a door he had opened, walked through, and closed behind him. You sat in the United States Congress, wearing the title that this nation gave you, drawing the salary that American taxpayers provide, protected by the Constitution that American soldiers died, defending, and you trivialized the memory of 977 people. In 5 words, he placed the folder on the stack. With the others, 3 folders, now 3 counts. A growing architecture of documentation that was piece by piece, constructing something that looked less like a hearing and more like a prosecution. Patel reached for his water glass. He drank slowly. He set it down. The act was deliberate, a courtroom technique for resetting the room's attention. After an emotional moment, jurors need transitions. Audiences need transitions. The pause between the accipans, emotional and the factual, is what allows both to land. When he spoke again, his voice was ice. Not cold. In the theatrical sense, not the villain's cold, not the politician's cold, the operational cold of a man returning to the task and, after allowing himself briefly a moment of humanity, let us return to the reason we are here, Minnesota. He opened the briefcase for the 4th time, the 4th folder. This one was the thickest, dense, with documents, exhibits, charts, that had been reduced to printed pages. Feeding Our Future, founded by Amy Bach in 2016 during the COVID-19 pandemic, the organization claimed to distribute millions of meals to school children through the federal child nutrition program. The actual number of M&R meals distributed was approximately 3% of what was claimed. The remaining 97% of the money, $250 million in federal funds, was stolen. He let the number exist in the room. $250 million, 78. Defendants have been indicted, more than 50 have pleaded guilty. Ms. Bach was convicted of wire fraud. Defendants spent the stolen money on lakefront properties, luxury vehicles, jewelry, and first-class travel. One defendant rented a private villa in the Maldives with money that was supposed to feed children in Minneapolis. He turned a page, But feeding our future is only the beginning. Investigators have since uncovered fraud in Minnesota's autism therapy program, an estimated $220 million, and in the Housing Stabilization Services program, $32 million. Acting United States Attorney Joseph Thompson described it as staggering industrial-scale fraud. Total estimated losses approach $1 billion. He looked at Omar. $1 billion. Congresswoman stolen from programs designed to feed children, house the vulnerable, and provide therapy to autistic kids in the state you represent in the community you claim to champion. Omar opened her mouth to respond. Patel continued. He did not raise his voice. He did not accelerate. He simply did not stop the way a river does not stop the way gravity does, not stop the way facts, once assembled in order, he generate a momentum that does not require force on. March 11, 2020, you introduced the Meals Act. The bill modified the Department of Agriculture's food and nutrition programs to allow certain waivers on requirements for school meal programs during pandemic-related school closures. The bill relaxed oversight requirements. It expanded the pool of organizations eligible to receive federal nutrition funds. It created precisely the conditions that Feeding Our Future exploited. He held up a printed page. Safari Restaurant, located in Minneapolis, seating. Capacity approximately 35 people. According to federal charging documents, Safari Restaurant claimed to serve 18,000 meals per day. 18,000 meals from a restaurant that seats 35. He set the page down. Congresswoman, you publicly praised Safari Restaurant. The owner of Safari Restaurant faces federal charges for his role in the fraud. He removed another document. Your campaign received $7,400 in donations from 3 defendants in the Feeding Our Future case. 2 of those defendants were associated with Safari Restaurant, which allegedly received $16 million in fraudulent funds. Omar spoke. Her voice was controlled, the control of a politician who has practiced this response. My campaign returned those donations immediately. When the FBI investigation became public, I encouraged all other officials to do the same. I have no involvement in any. Let me rephrase, Congresswoman. The phrase, "let me rephrase," landed with the precision of a signature. It was his phrase, the phrase he had used in courtrooms in Miami when a witness tried to dodge the phrase that said, "I heard you, and now I am going to ask the real question." You returned $7,400. The fraud we are investigating exceeds $250 million. You returned 0.3% of what was stolen. And when Fox News asked you whether you regret the Meals Act, the bill that created the conditions for the largest pandemic fraud in American history, you said, and I am quoting, "Absolutely not." He closed the port. Folder, Congresswoman, I have a question for you. The children. That money was supposed to feed the children in Minneapolis in your district, who were supposed to receive meals during a pandemic, when schools were closed and families were struggling. Do you know their names? Pause. Or do you only know the names of the people who donated to your campaign? The gallery stirred, not applause. The chairman would have gavelled that down instantly. Something quieter. The collective exhale of 300 people who had dole. I just heard the question. They had been waiting for someone to ask. Patel set the 4th folder on the stack. 4 counts. 4 folders. The briefcase was nearly empty. Now 1 folder remaining, and he was not ready for it. Yet he was ready for something else. He moved the microphone slightly closer an inch. The gesture was small, but it changed the acoustics of his voice, made it more intimate, more direct, as though he were speaking not to the room, but to a single person. This was another courtroom technique. When you want the jury to lean in, you lower your voice. When you lower your voice, the room follows. I want to tell this committee a story, he said, not about fraud, not about politics, about why I became a lawyer. His voice shifted, not softer or different. The lawyer's precision was still there, but underneath it, something warmer, something that sounded, if you listened carefully, like memory. Miami-Dade County, Florida, 2006. I was 26 years old, a public defender. The court assigned me a client, a 19-year-old kid, Haitian immigrant, arrested for drug trafficking felony charge 15 years. He paused. The kid barely spoke English. His family had no money, no connections, no lawyer on retainer. The system did what the system does. It assigned him to me, a 26-year-old public defender, son of immigrants fresh out of law school, carrying a case file and a briefcase that looked a lot like this one. He touched the leather case briefly, almost unconsciously. I read the file. The evidence was weak. The witnesses contradicted each other. The chain of custody on the drugs had gaps. I thought this kid might be innocent. He looked at the committee, not at Omar, at the committee, at the gallery, at the cameras. I fought for him 6 months, 12 court appearances, motions to suppress cross-examination of every witness, and at the end of it, acquittal, not guilty. His voice dropped, not to a whisper. Kash Patel did not whisper, but to the register where truth lives. Below rhetoric and above silence. Kid hugged me and cried. His mother fell to her knees on the courtroom floor and thanked God. And I, an Indian American, Hindu son of immigrants, expelled from Africa, stood in a Florida courtroom and understood something. I understood why this country is great, not because it is perfect, not because it is easy, because here, even the poorest, most forgotten, most powerless person has the constitutional right to be defended. He let the memory settle. Then he turned it. That is why I became a lawyer. That is why I joined the Department of Justice. That is why I investigated the FBI when the FBI abused its power. Because power, without accountability, is tyranny. Whether it comes from a drug cartel or a federal agency, and that is why I sit here today. He looked at Omar, directly. The distance between the witness table and the dais was perhaps 12 feet. In that 12 feet, there was nothing, no barrier, no partition, no shield, just air and light, and the accumulated weight of everything that had been said. Congresswoman, I spent 7 years as a public defender. I defended murderers, drug traffickers, financial criminals, people the system wanted to discard. I protected their constitutional rights, not because they deserved sympathy, but because they deserved the process that the Constitution guarantees. He paused 3 seconds, long enough for every person in the room to lean forward by a fraction of an inch. And I want to tell you something about those clients. Every single one of them, the murderers, the traffickers, the con artists, every single one of them stood in front of a judge and faced the charges. They did not call the judge a racist. They did not accuse the prosecutor of discrimination. They did not claim that the questions were motivated by bigotry. They did not claim, stood there, they answered, They faced it. His voice hardened. The iron was back. The warmth of the Miami story was gone, replaced by something that was not anger, but was adjacent to anger. The cold, righteous clarity of a man who has measured the distance between honesty and dishonesty and found it to be exactly the distance between the witness table and the dais. You have not done that, Congresswoman, for 10 years. You have been asked questions about your marriages, about your immigration records. Is your finances about your campaign spending? And for 10 years, your answer has been the same. That is a conspiracy theory. You are attacking me because I am Muslim. This is about racism. Every question, regardless of the evidence behind it, meets the same wall. He shook his head once, slowly, the way a lawyer shakes his head. During closing argument, when the evidence has spoken and the verdict is inevitable. The killers I defended in Miami were more honest than you, Congresswoman, because at least they did not pretend to be victims. The room did not move. The room did not breathe. The C-SPAN cameras, which had been tracking between Patel and Omar throughout the hearing, settled on Omar's face. Her expression was composed, the practiced composure of a politician who has been trained to maintain composure under fire. But her hands, which had been resting on the dais, had moved to her lap below the camera line, where no one could see whether they were steady. Something changed in Ilhan Omar for the first hour of the hearing. She had operated within the framework. She knew the framework that had carried her from a refugee camp in Dadaab, Kenya, to the United States Congress. That framework had 3 pillars: identity, narrative, and counterattack. When criticized, invoke identity. When questioned, reshape the narrative. When cornered, attack the questioner. It was a framework that had worked for 8 years of public life, through scandals and investigations and Twitter storms, and a president who had told a crowd to send her back. It had worked because it was rooted in something real. She was genuinely a refugee, a Muslim, a woman of color, in a system built by and for people who did not look like her. The framework was not entirely cynical. It was built on genuine experience and then weaponized for political survival. But frameworks have limits, and the limit of this one had been reached approximately 90 seconds ago when a man who shared her immigration story, who was also a child of expelled refugees, who was persistence, also a person of color who was also a religious minority, had used every element of her framework against her, and left her with nothing to deploy. She sat behind her nameplate for 4 seconds. Then she spoke, and when she spoke, she did something she had not done all morning. She abandoned the framework. Director Patel, her voice was different, not louder, not softer. Stripped the political varnish, had been scraped away. And what remained was raw. The voice of a woman who was no longer performing, but fighting. You sit there with your folders and your courtroom tricks and your carefully rehearsed stories about Miami. Let me tell you what I see. She leaned forward. Her hands were on the dais. Now palms down, fingers spread, the posture of someone bracing. I see a man who was appointed by a president who wants revenge. I see a man who wrote children's books, portraying himself as a wizard, protecting King Donald. I see a man who published a list of 60 Americans he calls government gangsters, and now runs the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country. I see a man who spent 2 years on a podcast promoting conspiracy theories about the FBI, and now he is the FBI. Her voice strengthened. There was power in it. Genuine power. The power of a survivor who has been cornered before and has never stayed cornered? You talk about honesty. You claimed on social media that COVID vaccines' spike proteins needed to be detoxified with supplement pills. You promoted election fraud claims that have been rejected by every court in America. You signed copies of your book with QAnon slogans, and you expect this committee to believe you are an impartial investigator. She shook her head. You are not here to find truth, Director. You are here to perform for an audience, and the audience is one person, and he lives at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The gallery erupted, not uniformly. The left side of the room burst into applause. The right side sat in stony silence. And the center, the press scribbled furiously. Chairman gavelled 3 times. Order was restored, but the energy in the room had fractured, split along the same fault line that splits the country. And in that fracture, both sides found what they had come looking for. The confirmation that they bonses were right. Patel did not react. He did not flinch at the terminus applause. He did not bristle at the accusations. He sat at the witness table with his hands flat, and his expression unchanged, the way a trial lawyer sits when opposing counsel delivers a passionate closing argument that sounds compelling but does not address the evidence. He waited the room settled. Congresswoman, he said, thank you. You just proved my point. He raised one hand, not dramatically, functionally, the way a man raises a hand to count on. His fingers, I asked you about Ahmed Noor. Said, Elmi, you did. Not answer. One finger. I asked you about $2,780,000 to your husband's firm. You did not answer 2 fingers. I asked you about the jump from $158,000 to $30 million in 1 year. You did not answer. 3. I asked you about some people did something you did not answer. 4. I asked you about Safari Restaurant. 35 seats, 18,000 meals a day. You did not answer. 5. I asked you about $7,400 from convicted fraudsters. You said you returned it. You did not address the underlying question. He lowered his hand. 6 questions. Congresswoman, 6 factual questions, each based on public records, court documents, financial disclosures, and your own statements. And instead of answering any of them, you attacked me, my appointment, my books, my background, my relationship with the president. He leaned forward slightly. The distance between them shrank by an inch, which, in the geometry of a hearing room, was the distance between professional and personal that is the oldest technique in criminal defense. I know it. I used it. When the evidence against your client is overwhelming, you do not argue the evidence. You attack the credibility of the prosecution. You make the trial about the prosecutor. Instead of the defendant, he straightened. But this is not a courtroom in Miami, Congresswoman. This is a hearing room in the United States Capitol, and the jury is not 12 citizens in a box. The jury is 330 million Americans watching on C-SPAN, reading on their phones, listening in their cars. He placed both hands flat on the table, the posture he had held at the beginning of the hearing, the public defender's posture. Hands visible, nothing hidden. I have defended the accused. I have prosecuted terrorists. I have investigated the FBI when the FBI broke the rules. And now I lead the FBI at every stage, from Miami to the Department of Justice to Capitol Hill to the Hoover Building. I have done the same thing. Followed the evidence, his voice dropped to its final register. Low, clear, unadorned. the voice of a closing argument that requires no embellishment, because the facts have already done the work. The evidence, Congresswoman, does not care about your identity. It does not care about mine. It does not care about party affiliation or cable news coverage or social media followers. The evidence is what it is. And when this investigation is complete, the evidence will speak. Not in headlines, not in press releases, not in hashtags, in courtrooms under oath, where the truth has consequences. He closed the briefcase. The brass clasp clicked shut, with a sound that was small and specific. And final, this investigation will continue. The questions I asked you today will be answered not by me, not by you, but by the evidence. And unlike you, Congresswoman, the evidence does not hide behind accusations of racism when someone asks it. A question. The chairman cleared his throat. Director Patel first. He believed this concludes the committee's first round. We will recess for 15 minutes before the second round of questions. The chair thanks the director for his testimony. Patel nodded. He picked up the briefcase lighter. Now its folders emptied, its contents distributed across the witness table like exhibits in a trial that had not yet reached its verdict, but whose direction was unmistakable. He walked toward the door. His Venus stride was even unhurried, the stride of a lawyer, leaving a courtroom after a day of testimony, knowing that the case is not over, that there will be more hearings and more questions and more documents, but knowing also that the trajectory has been established, that the evidence once presented cannot be unpresented, and that the truth once spoken in a room with cameras exists forever. In the public record, he did not look back. The door closed behind him with the sound of a briefcase clasp. Small, specific, final that evening, 2 families, 2 silences in a Capitol Hill apartment. Ilhan Omar sat with 3 members of her staff around a dining table, covered with laptops and phones. The television was on muted, closed captions. Scrolling, and the chyron read, Patel confronts Omar. FBI director raises marriage fraud and financial questions at oversight. Hearing a second chyron on a different network. Omar fires back. He is here to perform for an audience of 1. Her press secretary was drafting a statement. The statement used the words politically motivated, racist, attacks, and continued targeting of a black Muslim woman. It was the same architecture that every previous statement had used, because the architecture worked not with everyone, not with the people who had. We watched the full hearing, but with enough people, with the base, with the donors, with the ecosystem of progressive media that would amplify the message and reframe the narrative. By morning, Omar read the statement. She picked up a pen to sign. Then she paused through the window of the apartment. Washington was doing what Washington does at night. Glowing, the Capitol dome, lit from below, floated against the dark sky like a lantern. The monuments, the memorials, the stone and marble architecture of a stone, the nation's idea of itself, all of it visible from the window of a woman who had arrived in this country as a 12-year-old refugee from a camp in Kenya, who had spoken no English, who had sat in a classroom in Virginia and learned the Pledge of Allegiance phonetically before she understood what the words meant. She remembered the camp, not the details. Those had faded as childhood memories do, into impressions rather than images. But she remembered the feeling of waiting, not knowing whether the future existed or whether the present was all there would ever be. She remembered the day her father told her they were going to America. She remembered the plane, She remembered the cold Minneapolis in winter. After a lifetime of East African heat, the cold like a wall she walked into America had given her everything: citizenship, education, a seat in the state legislature, a seat in Congress, the covers of magazines, the attention of presidents, everything. She looked at the statement politically, motivated racist attacks, continued targeting for a moment brief private, visible to no one. Something crossed her face. Not guilt. Something before guilt. The faintest shadow of a question. Had she earned what this country gave her? Or had she used it? The moment passed. She signed the statement. She handed it to her press secretary. Send it in Garden City, Long Island, in a modest house, on a quiet street, the kind of street where the lawns are maintained, but not manicured, where the cars are clean but not new, where the American dream lives in its most ordinary and therefore most honest form. Pramod Patel sat in a recliner in front of a television. He was 75 years old. His hair was white. His hands, the hands that had built a career in aviation finance, after arriving in America with nothing, rested on the arms of the chair with the stillness of a man who has learned over the course of a long life. That stillness is not the same as inaction. Sometimes stillness is the deepest form of action. Sometimes stillness is how you hold the past and the present in the same moment. Without breaking, his wife brought tea. She set it on the side table. She sat on the couch beside his chair. She did not speak. She did not need to. They had been married for 48 years, and the language between them had long since transcended words on the television. A replay of the hearing their son Kash, the boy they had raised on this street, who had ridden his bicycle on this sidewalk, who had studied criminal justice at the University of Richmond and law at Pace University, and international law in London. Their son sat at a witness table in the United States Capitol and said, in America, even the poorest, most forgotten, most powerless person has the constitutional right to be defended. Pramod did not move. His wife wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He remembered Uganda, not the good years. There had been good years, years when the Indian community in Kampala had been prosperous and settled, and secure in the belief that Africa was home. He remembered the end of the good years. He remembered 1972. He remembered Idi Amin's voice on the radio, announcing that all people of Asian origin had 90 days to leave. He remembered the panic, the neighbors loading trucks in the middle of the night, the businesses being seized. The soldiers at the checkpoints. He remembered standing in an airport with his wife, and their belongings, not suitcases, because there had not been time for suitcases, just bags, cloth bags holding whatever they could carry. He remembered the plane. He remembered looking down at the African continent through the window and understanding with the certainty that only loss provides that he would never go back, that everything he had built was gone, that the future was a country had never visited, a language he spoke imperfectly, and a hope that had no evidence to support it, except the stories he had heard about a place called America, where they said a person could start over. On the television, his son closed a briefcase and stood and walked out of a hearing room. Pramod reached for his tea. He drank. He set the cup down when he spoke. It was the first thing he had said in over an hour, and he said it quietly to his wife in Gujarati, the language of their village in Anand district, the language that had survived Uganda and survived the flight and survived Long Island and survived 48 years of American life. He said, he did it right. His wife nodded. She did not ask what. He meant she knew. He meant everything. He meant the career and the testimony and the words spoken in a room full of cameras. But mostly, he meant the thing underneath, the thing that does not appear in transcripts or chyrons or press releases, the thing that a father who has lost everything recognizes, in a son who has earned everything integrity, the kind that is not performed but lived, the kind that begins in a courtroom in Miami and ends in a hearing room in Washington and belongs in between to a family that arrived with nothing and built something real in Cedar Riverside. The Minneapolis neighborhood known as Little Mogadishu, where the storefronts advertise in Somali, and the call to prayer drifts from the Dar al-Hijra Mosque, and the apartment towers rise against the Minnesota sky, like monuments to a community that has built a life far from home. A young mother turned off the television. Her son, 6 years old, born in Minneapolis, American by birth, and Somali by heritage, had been watching. Over her shoulder. He had not understood the hearing. He was 6, and the hearing involved words and concepts that were beyond him. But he had seen 2 faces on the screen, and he had recognized one of them because her face was on posters in the hallways of his apartment building and in the window of the coffee shop on the corner. "Mama," he said, "did Miss Omar do something wrong?" The mother did not answer immediately. She looked at the wall above the television where 2 things hung in frames. The first was a photograph. A family photograph taken in the lobby of the Minneapolis Convention Center on the day she had become a citizen. Her hand raised, her eyes bright, the flag behind her. The second was the certificate itself, the paper that said she was American, signed and sealed, and real. She looked at. Her son, being American, she said, is not something you take, it is something you earn every day. The boy nodded. The way 6-year-olds nod solemnly without full comprehension, but with the instinct that what has been said matters. She turned off the light outside the Minneapolis night, settled over Cedar Riverside, cold, clear, the kind of January night when the stars are visible even through the ambient light of the city, and the breath of anyone who steps outside forms a small cloud that rises and vanishes, the way all things rise and vanish.